I never thought the most important conversation of my life would come from a 7-year-old who still slept with a stuffed rabbit named Captain. My granddaughter never lied to me. Not once. Not about breaking the ceramic mug I kept on the kitchen windowsill. Not about feeding her vegetables to the dog under the dinner table. Not even when she was scared. So when she climbed onto the edge of my bed that Thursday morning, looked me straight in the eyes with that expression children get when they've been carrying something too heavy for too long, and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand, I didn't ask questions. I just unfolded it. The handwriting was crooked and small, the letters slightly uneven the way second graders write when they're trying very hard to be precise. "Grandpa, don't sign anything Daddy gives you," he told Mr. Alderman. It's already his. I read it 3 times. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack, but something deep in my chest went very, very still. I looked at her. She looked back at me. And in that moment, I understood that she had been waiting for days, maybe weeks, for the right moment to say what she couldn't say out loud. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Millhaven, Ohio, and I know a thing or two about patience, about watching and waiting. About the kind of silence that isn't emptiness, it's pressure building behind a closed door. My granddaughter's name is Lily. She was 7 years old that morning, just 2 months past her birthday, still wearing the pajamas with the little foxes on them that my wife had bought before she passed. Lily has her grandmother's eyes, dark brown, wide set, with that quality of paying attention to everything without seeming to. I used to joke that those eyes could read the room before anyone else in it knew there was a room to read. I was not joking anymore. Let me tell you how we got there. My son, my only child, married Sandra 11 years ago. She was sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately calculated what everything in it was worth. I told myself that was just drive, that the world rewards people who know what they want. I told myself a lot of things. My wife, Carol, saw it differently. Not long before she got sick, she pulled me aside one evening after dinner and said, quietly, the way she said the things she meant most, "Frank, I love our son, but that woman keeps a running total." I didn't know what she meant then. I do now. Carol passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. My son was attentive during that time. He came to appointments. He sat with her. He called every day. I won't take that from him. When it was over, the grief was real. I saw it on his face at the funeral. But grief fades. And what replaced it, slowly, was something I didn't recognize right away. It started with small things. My son began stopping by more often, not for dinners or holidays, but midweek, unannounced, with paperwork. He needed my signature for this account, or that form, he'd say. He was helping me consolidate things, simplify the estate, reduce complexity. I was 64 and still sharp, but I was also grieving. And grief makes you trust the people closest to you more than you should, because you need to trust someone. I signed things. Not everything he brought. Sometimes I'd ask to read it first, and he'd say it was just routine, just formality. But I'd still read it, but some things I signed without reading all the way through. I am not proud of that. The house I live in now is the same house where my son grew up. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch, half an acre backing up to a tree line that goes orange and gold every October. Carol and I bought it in 1989. It's paid off. It's worth, by the last estimate I'd heard, somewhere around $340,000. In Millhaven, that's a significant piece of property. I didn't know, that Thursday morning when Lily pressed the note into my hand, that my son had already spoken to a real estate attorney, that he had already told someone the house was going to be his, that somewhere in the stack of papers I'd signed over the previous 2 years, he believed he had what he needed to make that true. Lily knew. She hadn't understood all of it, of course. She was 7. But children absorb more than we give them credit for, especially the quiet ones. And Lily was very quiet, not because she couldn't speak, because she listened first, always. She'd heard her parents talking, more than once, from what she told me later. Late at night, after she was supposed to be asleep, voices carrying through the vent in the hallway of their house, her father's low, her mother's sharper, both of them certain she was sleeping. They talked about timelines, about the property, about my age and my health, about a man named Alderman, who I eventually learned was a real estate attorney my son had been consulting for almost a year. Lily didn't understand the word deed, but she understood Grandpa's house and already his, and the tone her mother used when something was decided, that flat, finished tone that meant the conversation was over. She'd written the note 4 days before she gave it to me. I know this because she told me. She'd carried it folded in the small inner pocket of her backpack, the one with the zipper she used for things she didn't want found, for 4 days. Waiting. She was waiting to be alone with me. Truly alone, without her parents nearby. Her father dropped her off at my house every other Friday for the weekend, and that particular Thursday had been a surprise. Sandra had a work event, and my son had asked, somewhat irritated, whether I could take her a day early. I said of course. He dropped her off at 4 in the afternoon without coming inside. That was why she chose Thursday morning, because she knew we had until Sunday, because she'd planned it. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment after I read the note. Lily sat across from me on the small wooden chair by the window, the one Carol used to sit in when she read in the mornings. She had her hands folded in her lap, watching me with those quiet eyes. "How long have you had this?" I asked. 4 days, she said. "Who taught you to spell alderman?" She reached into the pocket of her pajama top and produced a second, smaller piece of paper. It was torn from a notepad, one of those yellow legal pads, the kind I keep on my desk downstairs. On it, in a different handwriting, I saw the name, Alderman, and below it, a phone number. "I copied it," she said, "from Daddy's phone. He left it on the counter." I looked at her for a long time. She didn't look away. "Lily," I said, "I need you to tell me everything you remember." And she did. She told me carefully, in the way she did everything methodically, without embellishment, starting from the beginning. She told me about the night, roughly 2 months ago, when she'd woken up thirsty and heard her parents in the kitchen. She told me she'd sat on the top step in the dark and listened. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feeling, and the feeling scared her. She told me about a second time, 3 weeks later, when she heard her mother on the phone in the car, while Lily was supposed to be absorbed in a book in the back seat. She told me about a name she'd heard, Marchetti Properties. She told me her father had come home once with a folder that he'd put straight in the locked drawer of his desk, the one he thought she didn't know how to open. "You know how to open it?" I said. She gave me a look. "The key is on the hook inside the hall closet, on the nail behind the raincoats." I almost smiled. Almost. "Did you look inside?" I asked. She shook her head. "I was scared too," she said. Then, quietly, "But I think you should. I want to be very clear about something, because I know what some people will think when they hear this. They'll think a 7-year-old couldn't possibly understand the weight of what she was doing, that she might have been confused, or exaggerating, or working from half-overheard fragments she'd misread. I thought about all of that. I sat with it, and then I thought about Carol saying she keeps a running total, and I thought about all the papers I'd signed without reading completely, and I thought about my son's energy in recent months, the way he'd started referencing the house in casual conversation, the way Sandra had mentioned when you eventually need to downsize at Christmas dinner as though it were already scheduled, the way my son had begun visiting not with food or company but with folders. I called my own attorney that afternoon, a woman named Patricia Hesse, who had handled Carol's estate and who I trusted absolutely. I told her briefly what Lily had said. I asked her to pull everything I'd signed in the last 2 years and go through it carefully. She called me back in less than 48 hours. Her voice was controlled. Patricia was always controlled, but I'd known her for 9 years and I could hear what was under it. "Frank," she said, "there's a document in here from 14 months ago. It's structured as a co-ownership agreement. Your signature is on it. Did you read it before you signed?" I closed my eyes. He told me it was a maintenance authorization. Something about being able to approve repairs without calling me every time. Silence on the line. "Patricia," I said, "how bad is it?" "It's not a maintenance authorization," she said. "It transfers a 50% ownership interest in the property. Combined with a second document from 8 months ago, which appears to grant right of survivorship and first refusal purchase rights, your son has a plausible legal argument that he controls the disposition of this, house." The room didn't spin. I'm not the kind of man who lets rooms spin. But I felt something I hadn't felt since Carol's diagnosis, that specific, nauseating sensation of realizing the ground beneath you shifted while you weren't looking. "Can it be contested?" I asked. "That depends on whether the signatures were obtained through misrepresentation," she said, "which, if what your granddaughter told you is accurate, is very much worth pursuing." That evening, I made Lily's favorite dinner. Spaghetti with the kind of sauce I make from scratch, the one that takes 2 hours and makes the whole house smell like something good is happening. I didn't tell her what Patricia had said. She was 7. She had done enough. We ate at the kitchen table with the window open, and I let her tell me about her second-grade class and a girl named Priya who could do a cartwheel with her eyes closed, and I listened to every word. After dinner, when she was settled on the couch watching a nature documentary about sea otters, I stepped onto the back porch and stood in the dark for a while. The tree line was invisible against the night sky, but I knew it was there. I knew every inch of that property. I'd mowed that grass, raked those leaves, repaired that fence, sat on that porch with Carol on summer evenings when the fireflies came up from the field. This was not real estate to me. This was 35 years of a life. My son was going to take it. He'd been planning it for at least a year, probably longer. He'd waited until I was softened by grief, until I trusted him without question, until I was exactly the kind of target he needed me to be. I was angry. I want to be honest about that. I was very, very angry. Not the hot kind that makes you shake, the cold kind that makes you think clearly. The next morning, I drove to my son's house. Lily was with me. I hadn't planned that, but she'd woken up early and I wasn't going to leave her alone. And some part of me, the part that had been a teacher for 3 decades, the part that understood that witnesses matter, wasn't sorry she was there. My son answered the door in a sweatshirt, coffee in hand, looking relaxed in the way of a man who believes everything is going according to plan. "Dad," he said, "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," I said. I watched his face when he saw Lily standing beside me. Something moved behind his eyes, quick, almost imperceptible. But I'd taught teenagers for 31 years, and I knew the look, the calculation of what someone might have said. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply told him I'd had Patricia review my documents. I told him I knew about the co-ownership agreement. I told him I knew about Alderman and Marchetti properties. I told him I was giving him one opportunity, right now, to explain himself before I moved forward with legal action. What he did next told me everything I needed to know about who my son had become. He looked at Lily, not at me, at her, and he said, in a voice I'd never heard from him before, quiet and precise and cold, "You've been talking to your grandfather about things you don't understand." Lily didn't flinch. She looked back at him with those wide, steady eyes, and she said, "I understand enough." I put my hand on her shoulder. I felt her lean into it slightly, the way children do when they need to know someone is there. "We're leaving," I said to my son. "You'll be hearing from Patricia. I won't detail all the legal proceedings here. They took several months and were not pleasant. My son hired an attorney who argued that the documents were legitimate, that I had signed willingly, that I was fully competent and had been given adequate time to review. Patricia countered with records of the circumstances, the timing, the framing, the fact that I'd asked about the purpose of the documents and been deliberately misdirected. She was thorough and methodical, and she did not let anything go. What helped most, in the end, was Alderman himself. When Patricia contacted his office in the context of potential litigation, his response was not what my son had expected. It turned out that my son had told Alderman I was aware of the full scope of the arrangement, that I understood the co-ownership transfer, and had agreed to it as part of a deliberate estate planning strategy. Alderman had proceeded in good faith on that basis. When he learned what had actually been told to me, he was not cooperative with my son's legal team. The documents were voided. The property was restored to my sole ownership. My son paid a financial settlement I won't name. The relationship between my son and me did not survive it. I'd like to say something more nuanced than that, but I've spent a long time trying to find nuance in it, and I'm not sure there is any. He is my son, and I love him in the way you love someone you made, someone you raised, someone you watched take their first steps in the kitchen of that same house he tried to take from me. That love doesn't go away, but it changes shape. It becomes something you carry differently, heavier, and further from the surface, like a stone you stop trying to hold in your open hand. Sandra, I don't think about. Lily's situation became complicated for a while. My son and Sandra retained custody, and there were months where I didn't see her because visitation was tense, and my son made it difficult. I consulted with Patricia about my options as a grandparent. In Ohio, grandparent visitation rights exist, but they're not automatic, and the process was slow. What changed things was a development I had not anticipated. 6 months after the legal settlement, my son and Sandra separated. I won't claim to know the details. What I know is that Lily's mother called me on a Wednesday afternoon, and her voice was different from any version of her voice I'd ever heard, stripped of its edge. Something exposed underneath, And she said that things had fallen apart, and she was trying to figure out what was best for Lily, and she knew she hadn't been a good daughter-in-law, and she was asking if I would be willing to be involved in Lily's life on a regular basis. I said yes. I didn't ask for anything in exchange. I said yes because Lily was 7 years old, and she had pressed a folded note into my hand and said, "I think you should," and that was the child I intended to show up for. We found a rhythm. I pick Lily up from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We do homework at the kitchen table with the window open in warm weather and the radiator clicking in the cold. I make dinner. She tells me about Priya and the cartwheel and about a boy in her class named Oscar, who is very serious about dinosaurs. Sometimes we watch the nature documentaries she likes. Sometimes I read to her from the books on the shelf in the small bedroom that was my son's once, that is hers now on the nights she stays over. She still has Captain, the stuffed rabbit. He occupies the far corner of the pillow. She tells me he is retired from active duty, but likes to observe. I asked her once, on one of those Tuesday evenings, whether she'd been scared, when she wrote the note, when she waited 4 days to give it to me. She was quiet for a moment, twirling spaghetti the way I'd taught her, around the fork, not cutting it. "A little," she said. "What were you scared of?" She thought about it with the seriousness she brings to things that matter. "That you wouldn't believe me," she said. I set down my fork. I made sure she was looking at me before I spoke. "Lily," I said, "I want you to hear this. I believed you the moment I read the first word. Not the last word. The first word. Do you understand?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Yeah," she said. And then, softer, "I know." She went back to her spaghetti. I went back to mine. Outside, the October light was going gold through the kitchen window, the way it does in Ohio in the early evening, when the angle is just right and everything looks like something worth keeping. The tree line was doing its annual thing, orange and amber and deep red, the same as it has every year since I was younger than she is now. This house is mine. Every floorboard, every drafted window, every corner where the paint has been touched up one too many times mine. Not because of any document, because of 35 years of a life lived inside it, because Carol read in the wooden chair in the mornings, because my son took his first steps in the kitchen, because now, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a 7-year-old with her grandmother's eyes does her homework at my table and tells me about dinosaurs and cartwheels and the particular, unhurried dignity of a retired stuffed rabbit. There's a thing I used to tell my history students, years ago, when we'd get into the big, complicated questions about why people do what they do, why they betray each other, why they protect each other, why some people, in a crisis, shrink, and others, sometimes the ones you'd least expect, find something steady inside themselves and hold. I would tell them, watch the quiet ones. They're always watching you. If there is one thing I want anyone to take from this, any grandparent, any older person who has been made to feel that their age makes them easy, that their grief makes them pliable, that their love for their children makes them blind, it is this. The people who want to take from you will always underestimate the people who love you. They will overlook the child at the dinner table because she is small and quiet and 7. They will have entire conversations in front of her because they have decided she doesn't understand. That is their mistake. My granddaughter carried a folded note in the inner pocket of her backpack for 4 days. She chose her moment with a precision that I, a retired teacher of 68 years, found myself genuinely admiring. She handed it to me, not with fear, but with calm. She said, "I think you should," and she meant it, and she was right. She is 8 now. She lost a front tooth last month and was, by her own assessment, unbothered. She is reading chapter books, and has opinions about which ones are worth finishing. She has decided that sea otters are, in fact, the most interesting animal, and she will defend this position with more composure than most adults bring to their arguments. She knows the key to the hall closet. She knows it's on the nail behind the raincoats. She knows this because she notices things, stores them away, waits until knowing becomes useful. One day she will be formidable. She already is. The house still catches the light in October the way it always has. Some mornings I sit on the covered porch with coffee and watch the tree line come to life in the early sun, and I think about Carol, and I think about the long, slow arc of things, and I think about how the most important moment in the last 4 years of my life arrived on a Tuesday morning in fox-printed pajamas and asked for nothing in return. I'm still here. We both are. And the house, our house, is exactly where it belongs. If you're watching this and you have a grandchild who is quiet, who listens more than they speak, who watches the room with that particular quality of attention that makes you feel seen even when you'd rather not pay attention to them. Not just because they might save you someday, because they already understand more than you know. And if you're watching this, and you're in a situation like the one I was in, if someone close to you has been slowly rearranging the pieces of your life while you weren't looking, I want you to know that it is not too late. Find your Patricia. Find the person who will go through every page. And if there is a child in your life who has been carrying something in a pocket with a zipper, waiting for the right moment, let them give it to you. Believe the first word, not the last one. The first one, that's where the truth always starts.